Okay, let's make a start. One or two people might drift in, but you look about the right number. I'm Chris, eyebright Chris, my Twitter handle, and various other other nasty names I suspect that people give me. And I recognise some of your faces, I have to say. This is the beginners workshop, people who've never done Euphrasia before. I see one or two people who've been in my workshops previously, which either means right, so I thought you knew. Either means that I've taught you extremely badly and you didn't learn anything. You'll need a herbarium specimen and a handout. We're all going to watch you pick it up. But this is for beginners, okay? So if you know a bit about Euphrasia already, you might find some of it a bit obvious. But what I'm going to show you, I hope, is that you need a handout too. Handout on the left. Yes, that's the one. Euphrasia are really tricksy plants, and as are some other critical groups, brambles, dandelions. They all share that difficulty, even though the difficulty is for different reasons. So what I'm going to show you actually applies to quite a few of these critical groups. It's a way of getting into them, as it were, I hope. So why then are Euphrasia so awkward? What is it about Euphrasia? Well, they're parasites, semi-parasites, and they react differently depending upon what plant they're parasitizing. So if they've got their Haustoria, those are the little fibers that suck the goodness out of other plants, if they're parasitizing, say, Plantago, plantains, or Sagina, pearlwort, so often we're quite particularly plantain, like chunky plants, chunky Euphrasias. If on the other hand they're on a bit of grass, not a very good piece of grass, they may be a bit feeble. And so the same species parasitizing different plants will look often quite different. You might have a plant which is yay big and another one which is that big, and they'll be the same species. It's just that they're on a different host. And there are all sorts of other factors, most of which we don't really understand, which makes them very plastic, very responsive to the environment, and for various other genetic reasons makes them very variable. So here we have, this is Euphrasia micrantha, slender eyebright, and typically it will look like that. It's well known for being brightly coloured purple. Has other characteristics too. But on the left-hand one, this is also Euphrasia micrantha. This is photographed on Lewis, where all the slender eyebrights you find have got white flowers for some reason. They're growing in just the same sorts of places on the same sorts of hosts as the right-hand plant, but they look quite different. And flower colour is one of those things that seems to be very plastic. It seems to respond in different ways to different environments, in ways which most of we don't understand. So that's the first problem, is that plants of the same species will look quite different, and plants of different species will look the same. Awkward little beggars, really. And there is another problem, and that is that the taxonomy is almost certainly rubbish. Not quite true. We are working on a taxonomy which dates from the early 1970s. It was published in 1978 as a European study by this chap, Peter Yeo, who was a Don from Cambridge. And he did a pretty good job. But of course, it's 50 years out of date. And although they could do ploidy level in those days, they could count chromosomes, they didn't have any genetics to speak of. And so with a modern eye, we can look at the taxonomy and say, well, I don't think we'd have done that, knowing what we know now. And so the taxonomy is a bit of a tangle, and it's really not fit for purpose in 2024. You heard somebody this morning talking about genetic fingerprinting not working on Salix and not working on Bottom-of-Geaton. Well, I can tell you it doesn't work on Euphrasia either. And to make matters worse, if you do whole genome studies, which we were doing on Salix, we can't spot the species either. It's a real mess. I mean, there will be indicators in there which one day we'll find and which we might be able to use. But at the moment, even full genome doesn't give us the answer. They don't cluster in the way we'd like species to. So we know the taxonomy is wrong. And one of the byproducts of that is that if you try to apply it, as Clive states is key in Stasis flora, you try to apply it, you end up with this huge sort of 50 couplet key, which you have to go into reverse and jump back here and there. And occasionally you just get left high and dry and it just doesn't work. And I mean, trying to apply that on a rainy day on the top of Ben Lawes is, you just lose the will to live very quickly. So if you're starting out, it looks really daunting. And the purpose of today is to undaunt it, really, and try and make it more sensible. When we published the handbook, and I'm sure you've all got copies of the handbook, when we published the handbook, we made a decision not to, I think the phrase we used was tinker with the taxonomy, because it's a nice phrase, isn't it? So we really just reflected the taxonomy that Peter Year had published back in 1978. We thought the best we can do is to really tie down the descriptions that he published, which were a bit vague in places and overlapped in a lot of other places. Tie the descriptions down so we really know what we're talking about, and then we can move on from there. And so that's what we did. And we ended up with 22 species and God knows how many hybrids. And we were so enthusiastic about trying to get people to identify them that we published 3 different styles of key. We had a dichotomous key and a tabular key and multi-access key, more keys than you could throw at a door, and no less than 11 dichotomous keys. So you can get an idea of how difficult it turned out to be to try and make a handbook which we could use. And we didn't tinker with the taxonomy, only really in one place. And we decided that we wanted a bit of standardization. And there have been some arguments going on about whether one species of Euphrasia officinalis had subspecies or whether they were really species. And we chose to call them species, just really for standardization purposes. Nobody knows whether they're subspecies or species or whether they exist at all. But we chose to have them all as species. And so you will see that some of the names that we've used are species names for that very tiny little group. And that's reflected on the herbarium specimens you've got. You won't find Euphrasia officinalis on any of those specimens. You'll find Euphrasia roscoviana, Roscoff's eyebright, which is, some people believe, is a subspecies of officinalis. That's the only change we made. Yeah. So that's really how we felt, I think, when we tried to do this. So how can we avoid this? This is an unpleasant experience. You don't want to go there. How can we avoid it? Well, I think back to when I started doing this, because there was nobody to show me. Because the then referee, who was fantastic at identifying eyebrights, was not the greatest explainer in the world. And so we have to really start from basic. And if you think about it just for a moment, if you want to learn some arithmetic, when you're a kid, you start with a left-hand page. You don't jump in on the right-hand page and try and understand all these sines and cosines and sigmas and stuff, all this integration. We don't go over any of that. Simple stuff. So what I've done today is to design what I hope is simple stuff for Euphrasia. It's the 2 + 2 = 4 for Euphrasia. And what that means is that you have to choose to walk past a lot of stuff. You have to choose to walk past the tricksy bits. And we're, I think that's Scotland after a few whiskies. We're going to confine ourselves to Scotland to start off with, and that gets rid of a few species we have to worry about because they don't grow in Scotland, so that's great. And we are going to ignore the really rare stuff. Because if you want to see this lovely plant, which is Campbell's eyebright, Euphrasia campbellii, you've got to go to Lewis. And in fact, you've not only got to go to Lewis, you've got to go to a little bit of Lewis or some little bits of Lewis to find it. So you're not going to fall over it, your local vice carrier. You're just not going to do that. You've got to make a special trip. So we're going to ignore these really rare things that have very restricted distributions because you're not going to see them. This is Marshall's eyebright, named after Reverend E.S. Marshall, who was a, not U.S. Marshall, E.S. Marshall. Really only grows on the north coast of Scotland. There are a few bits here and there, but basically it's a northern Scottish plant. So we're not going to touch that one either. All these rare things you just have to ignore for the moment because they clutter up the key. They make it more and more difficult, and you're just dealing with a plant you're never going to see unless you go out of your way. And what that means, which is really handy for us, is that the great majority of these rare things, in fact all of them, have long glandular hairs. And if you look at the picture of look at the picture of Marshall's eyebright, you can see long white hairs on the surface of the leaves. Yeah, and all these rare plants have long glandular hairs. And so if you find a plant that's got long glandular hairs, you walk past it, or you send it to the referee. So, for example, that's Marshall's eyebright. This is Ostenfeld's eyebright, Euphrasia Ostenfeldii. You can see again, not quite so obvious, but there are long glandular hairs there. And this one is the rarest of all, which is Euphrasia rotundifolia, round-leaved eyebright, only found on one small patch about the size of one of these seats on the north coast of Scotland and also on Shetland, fairly recently found. So if it's got long glandular hairs, don't go there. Okay, and there's an added advantage because I think when Peter Yeo was doing this, I think he got fed up actually. I think he got a bit hacked off with eyebrights because when he wrote his monograph, he would say things like, well, I'm not going to deal with these plants. Somebody else will have to sort that out. And some of the things he didn't sort out were these glandular hairy plants. And so there are quite a few plants that we don't have a name for because Peter couldn't be bothered to sort it out, left it to somebody else. So that's really irritating because they're not actually in the book at all or in the key. So they're really good plants to avoid. Don't go there. And don't go to the seaside either. No buckets and spades for you phrasiologists, because there are a couple of plants. The top one is Euphrasia tetraquatra. I can't remember what its English name is. And the Fuller eyebright here, what we currently call the Fuller eyebright, Euphrasia phalancis, tetraquatra and phalancis, and they're purely coastal. So we can get rid of those by sticking inland. So no ice cream, no buckets, no seaweed. So by avoiding special environments, and that's one of the ones we've chosen, we can avoid having to identify a couple more plants. And there's yet another one, no climbing hills. Okay, if you go above 400 meters, you might find, it's quite rare, but you might find this one, which you'll find very confusing. It looks quite like a couple of the common ones. So again, you're starting out. Yes, you really want to keep it simple. You can see that there's quite a bit of it in Scotland, but it's all upland. It's all on top of Ben Lawers and high mountains. So we can get rid of this is Euphrasia frigida, upland eyebright, what we currently call Euphrasia frigida. And by doing that, we can reduce the number from 22 to 6. Don't you just love 6 and compare with 22? I think it's fantastic. I'd much rather do 6 than 22. And all of these are more or less common. You know, if you're in the, well, we're in Scotland, as I say, if you're in Cambridgeshire, you won't find very much micrantha, for example, but we're not in Cambridge. All of these are more or less common in Scotland. The least common in Scotland are the middle two, Officinalis, which you remember is Roscoviana as far as your herbarium specimens is concerned, and Nemorosa, the common eyebright. In fact, actually, it's not common at all. The commonest eyebright in the UK is the top one, Euphrasia arctica, the Arctic eyebright, by far the most common. Confusa, the confused eyebright, we'll come on to. Nemorosa, called the common eyebright in English. It isn't. Old Micrantha, the slender eyebright, you've seen a picture of, and Scotica, the Scottish eyebright. So it's nice plant. So, where do we go from here? Well, you've got key, haven't you? And the first thing we look at are the hairs on the plant. Now you'll remember that if it's aglandular hairs, if the hairs haven't got any glands on the end, you ignore the plant. But if it's got these long glandular hairs, and you can see them here, all the way down they're usually multicellular, they're very often a bit wavy, and they've got a bobble on the end, the gland. If you've got long glandular hairs on your plant, you've got Euphrasia officinalis. Okay. What the English really have a proper name for just officinalis. I would call it Linnaeus's eyebright if it was me, but it doesn't really have a proper English name. And here's an example of it. You probably can't see the glandular hairs very well there, but this is Euphrasia officinalis, taken in the south of England, actually. So that's our first slice. That's our first bit of Occam's razor that we can apply, is to see whether it's got long glandular hairs, because then we know what it is. Well, if it hasn't got long glandular hairs, well, we need two more crucial characters. And the first one is to measure the size of the corolla, the size of the flower. And the trick is to pull one out and measure it from the back of the corolla to the front. And you'll see that these little bunny ears here, little flaps that flap back at the front of the corolla very often. Ignore those. You want just the center of the corolla. And you measure it in millimeters. Okay? And you can make this easy too. I mean, you can foodle about with a ruler and so forth, but what you really need, one of these, and I haven't got shares in Summerfield books yet. This is a graduated loop, and basically it's a little magnifier, and on the bottom is engraved a millimeter scale, and you put the thing on the corolla, peer down it and go, oh, 8 millimeters. It takes seconds, and you can even do it when it's lashing with horizontal rain at the top of Ben Nevis. I've done it. It works. They really do make life easy. So if you're a beginner and you're looking to make life easy for yourself, I really recommend one of those. It's just fantastic investment. The only problem is they don't have a hook on them, and so you can't tie it on. And if you're like me, if you put it down, you forget it. Anyway, so you need to measure the corolla. And you will see that the second couplet you've got is the corolla measurement. And it will say if it's greater or less than 5 millimeters, or less than 5 millimeters or greater than 5. And if it's less than 5, that tells you that if we go back to our previous screen, if it's less than 5, that tells me that it's one of these two. And it should say that on your crib sheet. If it's greater than 5, where's my spot gone? Oh, here we are. If it's greater than 5, it's one of those three. Well, that's pretty good again, isn't it? That's not a bad split. I mean, it's almost 50-50. Pretty fine. So by measuring the corolla, we can deal with the next couplet, and we can split them almost 50-50. Well, that still leaves us with a chunk. And for this, we need the third character, a third crucial bit. Oh, and I should say, incidentally, if you happen to be sending me material, if you want something identified or confirmed, you're sending stuff, please measure the corolla for me, because it's so much easier for you to do it when it's fresh. And I've got this scruffy, squaggly little thing that's come through the post. GPO have done their very best to sit on it. If you can measure the corolla, why does it make life better? Okay, so that's what you can do. Now, the third thing is to look at the actual plant itself. And what we need to find is the lowest flower. And here, it's not a flower, it's a capsule, because it's flowered and it's setting seed. So the lowest flower or the lowest capsule. And what you do is you count up from a base and work out what the lowest flowering node is. And helpfully, Euphrasias very often will have the cotyledons, the seed leaves, left on the stem. Not always, but that's about the only helpful thing that eyebrights do. So here's the cotyledonary node, 0. Now that's 0. 1, 2, there's a branch there, but I don't go up a branch, go up the main stem. 3, don't go up a branch. 4, 5. Now, that's not quite together, but it's close enough. That's one of those judgments you have to make, how far apart alternate has to be before it becomes alternate. So this is flowering at node 5. Okay, now you'll find that the sheets you've got have usually got 5, perhaps 6 specimens on, and that's because they are variable plants, and they won't all flower at node 5. Some will be 5, some will be 6, some might be 7, whatever. So you will find that you've always got a range, and you have to try and fit the range into what I'm telling you. Okay, so if we go back to Micrantha and Scotica, that's a slender eyebright, excuse me, and the Scottish eyebright, and you'll remember that they are less than 5 millimeter corollas. You can see they're quite small, and they all have these long internodes and small corollas. And the magic number is 6. If it's flowering at 6 or above, it's almost certainly Micrantha, and below 6, Scotica. So that's the magic number for those. And the magic number for anything else, the other 3, the magic number is 10. Because if you're flowering at 10 or above, it's likely that you've got Euphrasia nemorosa. And if it's flowering at 9 or below, it's likely that you've got Arctica. And if you've got this one, which is Confusa, I think you can probably see that the leaf shape is quite particular in that the side teeth point towards the end of the leaf. And if you look at the specimens, it's difficult to take a photograph of Confusa. You'll find the specimens are very flexuous. Very main stem tends to be a bit sinusoidal, and it tends to branch from the base. And there's a very good reason for that, but we won't go into it. Okay, so the magic number for Micrantha and Scotica is 6, and the magic number for the others is 10. And then you have to look at the finer detail for Confusa. I'm sorry. Yes, a 10. Nemorosa is 10 and up. Arctica is 9 and under, and Confusa could be, it's a bit wider Confusa. It's 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, but you're looking at the shape for Confusa, really. Okay, so the purpose of today's exercise, just about on time, is that in front of you, you have what I think are guaranteed correct, fingers crossed, guaranteed correct the identified herbarium sheets. And what I want you to do is to convince yourselves that in fact they are correct by applying the information that you now know. You've got one of the 6 in front of you. The only caveat is that because you can't measure the corollas effectively in this sort of situation, even if you could see them, you have to accept that the corolla size is correct. Yeah, but if it says Micrantha, that the corolla will be 4.5 millimeters long. Okay, because you won't be able to check now, of course. But all the rest, you should be able to see the hairs, you should be able to count the nodes and all the rest of it, and assure yourself, as far as you can, that you've got what it says on the tin. Okay, and then every so often we'll swap over, and I'll try to answer any questions you've got, but it's difficult to get about. Probably the most difficult thing is counting the nodes. So this is a really good exercise because you know that the nodes are are correct, going to be correct. Just one thing while we're here, this is not particularly for you today, but I mention it now because lots of people don't work in herbaria anymore. If you're upstairs in the herbarium or in the Natural History Museum, you hold a herbarium sheet flat, because if you tip it up, the plant will fall off, or might fall off if it's a bit loose. It doesn't matter. This is an educational set, and I know it's far from ideal, but really, like a determiner, in an ideal word, you take the botanist to the plant, not plant to the botanist. That's what you do with a herbarium specimen too. You stick your head on it. So if you're walking about in a herbarium, doesn't matter today, just pick it up. The question is about looking at the nodes. Many of the nodes will be represented by scars where the leaves have dropped off. So you find that if the cotyledons have dropped off, which they might have done, that'll be the bottom scar. And above that, you'll have some more scars until you actually get to a leaf. And of course, if you're looking at, say, Nemorosa, which is flowering quite high, you'll have lots of scars because it's not going to flower early. So yeah, you'll be looking at leaf scars. Yes. Okay, good question. Good question. Such a good question. I can't find. Oh yes, here we are. The key mentions floral leaves. The floral leaves are the leaves above the bottom flower. You might call them bracts if you prefer. Up here, these ones are the floral leaves, and the corline leaves are the ones below the lowest flower. All this means stem in Latin, so they're the stem leaves. So below the first flower, corline leaves, above the first flower and the first flower itself, floral leaves. Another point that somebody just made, and this is a problem with herbarium specimens, is that the way that Euphrasia behaves when you dry it is that the leaves tend to fold up against the stem, and sometimes it can be quite tricky to actually see the upper surface of the leaf at all, to see whether it's got hairs on it. And this is why it's so much better to do this in the field, because you can see instantaneously. You can pull a leaf off and peer at it, whereas you don't do with that herbarium specimen. You're much more constrained with a herbarium specimen. It's much better to do this in the field, at least to start off with anyway. Yeah, good point. Okay. Question is, when you're looking for the glandular hairs or the glandular hairs, where do you look? Whereabouts on the plant? And the best place to look is right at the top, okay, because the hairs get worn off. They blow about in the wind and hairs get worn off. And so if you look at the very top, if I was looking on this plant, I'll be looking up there. That's the most likely place you're going to find the hairs, because they will have worn off in other spots. And the best place to look is in the plant's armpits. So if I'm at top, here's my leaf. Yeah, I'm the stem. There is where, because they're protected, and they're also sticking out sideways from the stem, and they're really obvious. So the best place, that's by far the best place to look. Let's start off with. I mean, there might be anywhere. Sometimes a plant will be covered in them, but the place where you're most likely to see them, particularly late in the season, is at the top, underneath the join between the leaf and the stem, the petiole. Good question. I often think you can tell that people are really thinking about things is because you ask really good questions. Right? That's fantastic. The question is, you've got it. And I'm being rude here. You're beginners, okay? And so you get it down to one of these. Excuse me. What do I do? Can I put it on the DDB if I've got it to that? And the answer is yes, with one question mark. And you should do this for every plant, really, that having sorted it out, keyed it out, as it were, which is what you're sort of doing, you then need to go to the actual plant description and see whether it 100% fits. You need to get your handbook out, and we're explaining in the handbook how to make sure if you've got if you're here and you've got these three, you think you know it's one of those three, and you think it's this one because it's flowering at no 8. Well, you can look up Arctica and compare all the characters. Is the corolla size exactly right? You know it's flowering in the right place. What about the leaf shape? We'll talk about that. What about the toothing? We'll talk about that. And so you need to check it. It's always the same. I mean, you key something out. I mean, you go to the description and check, wouldn't you? Just the same here. Once you've checked and it does tally, the quid's in. Yep. Time to swap again. Come on. Make sure it's something you haven't seen. Okay, we're going to have to finish off. So the purpose of the exercise, always, tell people what you're going to do, then you do it, and then you tell them what you've just done. The purpose of the exercise is not, or was not, to enable you to identify any euphrasia. And a lot of what you see in the field, wherever you go, you won't know what they are. The purpose of the exercise is so that you can make a start, and that you will be able to find sometimes plants which you can identify. And my sort of mantra for life is I'm a pint pot half full person, not a pint pot half empty person. And just being able to identify one or two in the field is, if you're starting out, is actually a big step forward. And you will find it easier in the field than you will using these herbarium specimens. And there will be, I understand, a Scottish field trip to somewhere to look at Euphrasias. Sometime, I think Matt's going to organise one, I'm told. So there should be a field trip sometime during the year to look at Euphrasias, and we'll be going to a place where they have the commonplace ones, not the north coast of Scotland or somewhere where they have exciting ones. But if you find things that you don't know what they are, you can always send them to me, the referee, and I'll tell you what they are. Well, I'll tell you what I think they are. The advantage of that is that if you worked out, what you want to do is work it out for yourself if you can, and then I'll tell you that you've got it right, you've got it wrong, or it's halfway house. Because of course you get lots of hybrids, and that does mess the system up. Okay, thank you all very much. Oh yes. Okay, you package it like this. Chris, oh, he's gone. Just between 2 sheets of newspaper is fine. For each specimen, you need to put the usual information on, grid reference date. So corolla size, yes, good. Make sure it's pressed properly. What I find some people do is they're out in the field and they find a patch of Euphrasia and they go, and they grab about 6. You need 6 plants. They grab half a dozen and they stick it between 2 bits of paper, and then they call that pressing the plant. What you need to do when you get it home is to separate them out so that they don't get tangled up. And anyway, you want to examine them. You want to find what they are first before you send it to me. So yeah, just press between 2 bits of paper. Don't mount them on anything, because I'll just have to take off the mounts to see what I'm looking at. Yeah, it's a good idea to email me first if you're going to do that, just to make sure I'm not in New Zealand or something, Steve. The handbook is at the moment out of print. I've just been talking to Paul. We're going to print some more copies. We were hoping to have an update on Euphrasia taxonomy ready for this meeting, but it's not quite there yet. But there will be a reprint of the handbook coming up. They've run out at the moment, but there will be some more, I'm told. Habitat information is very handy. Photographs, no, bit of a waste of time. You usually can't see the information that you need. Sometimes you can. Some you can identify easily from photographs. Others you haven't got hope. Okay, thank you very much.